tune with the Thatcherites, shall we say. There were some alternative voices and protests around today. I'm joined now by the singer-songwriter Paul Heaton, best known for his time in the House Martins and the beautiful South, and with a bit of a reputation as a critic of Margaret Thatcher. Very good evening to you, Paul Heaton. How did you mark the day?
How did I mark the day? I watched a bit of it on telly, and I marked it by coming down to London to do this, really. So not a great deal of marking in my household.
So tell us, you've certainly been known for having a go at Margaret Thatcher. What was it really that you and your generation found so much to protest about?
Well, I think it was probably her representation of her class. I mean, it was a topsy-turvy world politically in those days anyway, but, you know, particularly as she labelled Mandela a terrorist, whilst, you know, Pick Botha, you know, with his death squad activities, was a personal friend, and also hard-working miners were labelled as the enemy within, and somebody like General Pinochet, another death squad activist, was also seen as a friend and somebody she stood up for. So I suppose it was the inconsistency, and it was the fact that she was called the lady's not for turning, but when she wanted to turn against democracy, she turned like your regular garden worm.
Today, people have found all sorts of voices to either celebrate or to remonstrate or to protest today. Some would say that you don't speak ill of the dead when they're dead like this. I mean, how do you think people have handled what they had to say about her today?
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean, certainly when she was ripping up our communities and particularly our families in those communities, the awful irony of the whole day today was, while she had done that, her own family wasn't setting such a good example. And you know, if I may use a word, I hate the word feral, but this dysfunctional family, one of the first dysfunctional feral families that she produced, and I'm not going to mention on a day like this the alcoholic husband or the racist daughter or the prison-bound son. But, you know, one of the things that I felt about the poor family when they were on the steps at St Paul's was, you know, the only person missing from the bottom really was Jeremy Kyle. And I feel as well, to be honest, if you're looking at the whole day, Fidel Castro recently said of Hugo Chavez's funeral, you can tell and judge a person's popularity by who cries at the funeral. And today was looking on the coverage that I've been watching, it was a very bad day for big business and the political elites, the ruling class, and a good day for the nurses and the ordinary workers and the mine workers and steel workers, who incidentally weren't celebrating. We never actually spent 10 million on the thing, but we're having maybe a quiet glass of Coca-Cola.
What form did the protests take of a quarter of a century ago when you first got involved, if you like, in sort of the Red Wedge movement, where the music profession and the arts came together to raise the voice against what they believed she was doing wrong?
Well, as a relatively young man, it made me fairly angry, you know, and it affected my music, actually. It affected the way I sang on stage and the way I turned the instruments up, and et cetera, et cetera. But on a personal level, I was on the dole at the time, and it just felt, well, I wouldn't say she was the only one, that we were against the Conservative movement throughout. You know, there were other figures other than Thatcher, you know, Tebbit himself, who I hear got a quiet cheer today. But there was many people. It wasn't just Thatcher. And, you know, I would argue against this thing about, you know, the witch is dead. She was an intelligent woman. She was a powerful woman. And I felt the greatest thing of the time was that we had an enemy that we could see. Of course, these days you turn on the telly and Cameron is denying being the son of a banker with banking interests, and Miliband is denying being socialist, and everything's in the middle ground. At least then we knew who the enemy were, and it was quite clear and quite enjoyable to turn on the telly and be able to identify a politician by actually what they wore, or, you know, there was a red tie in the corner for Dennis Skinner and Thatcher was on the other side with a blue dress. It was a much more easier time to express yourself politically as a young man, you know.
Just a thought about this day and age. Do you feel as strongly about the governments of more recent years, or was it just Mrs Thatcher that got you going?
No, I think there's an enormous amount of nostalgia in the anti-Thatcher thing. I feel exactly the same way about Cameron, Osborne, and the rest of them. Exactly the same. I think there's an element of people who, you know, those people who go to those Rick Astley sort of 80s concerts who have slagged Thatcher off just for the reason that they're trying to remember the 80s. This is what I want to do now. I want to represent those people who I represented back then, and I haven't changed. And unfortunately, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party have vanished from their previous position and have become far too chummy for anybody like myself involved in political debates. And I have to say, I feel on the outside, but today I feel back on the inside.
So what have they done? Left you behind then, all these politicians?
I mean, in a recent debate with one of the Conservatives, they described me as a class warrior, and unfortunately, neither the Labour Party or the Conservative Party or the other lot seem to have anybody properly representing that class, because I think what's happened over the years is there's so much investigation on telly that you can't slip any true feelings into a debate, any true representation. Even though we know Cameron represents the banking class, he will not slip. You can see him. In fact, he's an expert with his baby-faced public school look. He's an expert at covering up his real agenda.
We're going to have to leave it there. Paul Heaton, very good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky News. Coming up at 6, more on the funeral of Lady Thatcher, attended by thousands from around the world.
Over